Can I survive a face-to-face with a mafia boss by showing him this ring? Most people see a piece of jewelry and think of wealth, but in the underworld, a ring isn't an ornament, it's a signature. I was staring down the barrel of a gun, the cold sweat of a dead man pooling in my collar, when I raised my hand. Not to plead, but to show him the tarnished silver band on my finger. The air in the room didn't just cool, it froze. The man who had just ordered my execution, a monster who ruled the city with a butcher's blade, suddenly looked like he'd seen a ghost from the pits of hell. Tonight, I'm taking you inside a world where power isn't measured in bullets, but in ancient bloodlines and the symbols that represent them. We're exploring how a seemingly ordinary encounter turned into a life-altering mystery because of one powerful ring. Stay tuned, because the secret behind this silver band is about to change everything you think you know about the Mafia. Hit that subscribe button, because you won't want to miss the fallout of this revelation. I never intended to be a hero, and I certainly never intended to be a martyr. My name is Elias, and for most of my life I was a man of shadows. Not the criminal kind, but the kind that stays out of the way. I worked as a restorer of antiquities, a quiet profession for a quiet man. But everything changed when I witnessed something I wasn't meant to see, a high-level handoff in the back of a rain-slicked warehouse. Before I could retreat, the heavy click of a Beretta echoed against the corrugated metal. I was hauled into a dimly lit office that smelled of expensive cigars and old blood. At the desk sat Don Marcello, a man whose reputation was a tapestry of terror. He didn't look like a thug, he looked like a king. He looked at me with an indifference that was more terrifying than rage. To him, I was a loose end, a smudge on a clean glass that needed to be wiped away. His crew, a collection of scarred men with dead eyes, stood around me, waiting for the signal to drag me to the docks. The peril was absolute. There were no cameras, no witnesses, and no hope of a rescue. Marcello leaned forward, the light catching the sharp lines of his face. He began to speak of necessary evils, and the unfortunate timing of my presence. I felt the weight of the silver ring on my finger, a family heirloom I'd worn for years without a second thought. My grandfather had told me never to take it off, but he'd never told me why. As the Don signaled his lead enforcer, a man they called the Butcher, I realized I had only one card to play, though I didn't even know its value. I raised my hand, palm outward, and the ring caught the dim yellow light of the desk lamp. To understand why I was even wearing that ring, you have to understand my grandfather, Silas. He was a man of few words and many scars, a silent figure who lived in a cabin filled with books written in languages I couldn't identify. He gave me the ring on his deathbed, his voice a dry rasp as he told me it was a key to the silent house. I thought it was the rambling of a dying man, a bit of poetic nonsense to accompany a piece of junk silver. I wore it out of sentiment, a reminder of the only family I had left. Leading up to this confrontation, I'd lived a life of deliberate avoidance. I stayed away from the rough parts of town, paid my taxes, and kept my head down. But the ring had a way of drawing eyes. Old men in the park would stop and stare at my hand. Antique dealers would offer me absurd amounts of money for it without even examining the hallmarks. I always refused, gripped by an irrational sense of duty to Silas. I didn't realize that the ring wasn't just silver. It was a beacon, signaling a lineage that preceded the very concept of the modern mafia. As I stood in Marcello's office, the tension was a physical weight. I had spent my life trying to be invisible, yet here I was, the center of attention for the most dangerous men in the city. I remembered Silas's hands, rough, powerful, and always adorned with this same band. He had moved through the world with a strange immunity, a man who feared nothing. As the Butcher stepped toward me, reaching for my throat, I felt a surge of Silas's stoicism. I didn't plead for my life. I didn't offer them money. I simply held my hand steady, letting the ring speak for me. The Butcher's hand froze inches from my neck. It wasn't because of anything I said, it was because Don Marcello had made a sound, a sharp, strangled gasp that cut through the silence like a blade. The Don stood up so quickly his chair toppled backward, crashing against the floorboards. His face, previously a mask of cold stone, had drained of all color. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring, transfixed, at the silver band on my right hand. "Where did you get that?" Marcello whispered, his voice trembling with a fear that seemed impossible for a man of his stature. The Butcher and the other enforcers looked confused, their eyes darting between their boss and the ordinary-looking man in the center of the room. Marcello stepped around the desk, his movements hesitant, almost reverent. He didn't look like a predator anymore. He looked like a subject approaching a throne. He reached out as if to touch the ring, then pulled his hand back as if he might be burned. The power of the ring wasn't mystical in the sense of magic spells. It was mystical in the sense of history. It bore a sigil, a weeping eye entwined with a serpent, that belonged to the Consiglio d'Ombra, the Shadow Council. These were the men who had founded the very traditions the Mafia lived by, a hidden elite that existed long before Marcello's great-grandfather was born. To wear that ring meant you were a direct descendant of the founders, the Untouchables of the old world. Marcello knew that to spill the blood of a ring-bearer was to invite the total erasure of his entire family tree. His demeanor shifted instantly from hostile to profoundly respectful, his head bowing slightly in a gesture of ancient submission. The aftermath of that encounter was a blur of surreal respect. Marcello didn't just spare my life, he escorted me to his own private car. The butcher, the man who was seconds away from ending me, opened the door with a trembling hand and refused to meet my eyes. I was driven back to my apartment not as a witness to be silenced, but as a dignitary to be protected. For the first time in my life, the shadows I had lived in felt different. They felt like a fortress rather than a hiding place. In the days that followed, the power of the ring manifested in ways I could barely comprehend. My landlord, a man known for his greed, suddenly told me my rent was covered for the year. Local businesses that were clearly fronts for Marcello's operations would refuse my money, their owners nodding at me with a terrifyingly deep recognition. The ring hadn't just saved my life, it had rewritten my identity. I was no longer Elias the Restorer, I was a living relic of a power structure that governed the city from the darkness. The profound impact on my life was a realization of responsibility. Silas hadn't given me a piece of jewelry, he had given me a mantle. I began to research the Shadow Council, finding traces of their influence in the architecture of the city and the coded language of old legal documents. The ring was a symbol of an unexpected power, the power of heritage and the weight of secrets kept across generations. I realized that my quiet life was over. You don't wear the eye and the serpent and remain a ghost. I had become the one thing I feared, a man of significance. Looking back at that night in the warehouse, I realized that our world is built on hidden foundations. Some objects, like this tarnished silver band, hold a weight that transcends their physical form. They are anchors to a past that most people have forgotten, but that the powerful still fear. I survived a face-to-face with a monster because of a piece of metal, but more importantly, I survived because of the truth that metal represented. The incredible outcome of that night taught me that we are never truly ordinary. We all carry the echoes of those who came before us, whether in the form of a ring, a name, or a set of values. My life is no longer quiet, and it is certainly no longer safe in the traditional sense, but it has purpose. I now navigate the city knowing that the powerful ring is a reminder that some ties are never broken, and some authorities are absolute, even in the lawless dark of the underworld. This story makes me wonder, do you believe that objects can hold this kind of unspoken power? Or is it all just a matter of who is watching? I want to hear your theories. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think the ring's sigil really represents, or share a story of a family heirloom that changed your perspective. If you're hooked on these deep dives into the mysteries of power and the hidden side of history, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We have plenty more intriguing stories that challenge the boundaries of reality coming your way. Thanks for watching, and remember, look closely at what you've inherited. It might just save your life.